The quiet hum of international airports often conceals a hidden rhythm, a cadence of lives intersecting, luggage shuffling, announcements echoing, and planes arriving and departing with mechanical precision. In this steady pulse, one figure moved almost imperceptibly, weaving through terminals and gates with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to observation without notice. For intelligence analysts tracking the Boeing 707 operation, these movements were far from routine. Every layover, every flight booked and canceled, every contact made in transit cities revealed subtle patterns that hinted at a larger, meticulously orchestrated plan. The agent's presence in these spaces seemed ordinary at first glance, yet the very ordinariness was what made it extraordinary. He was neither careless nor conspicuous. His movements were deliberate, almost choreographed, a shadow moving through the periphery of daily life, observed only when one knew exactly what to look for. Each airport presented a different environment, a unique set of variables to navigate. The agent passed through crowded European hubs where terminal layouts were labyrinthine, where security personnel rotated shifts at predictable intervals, and where the ceaseless flow of passengers offered cover. In Asia, he lingered briefly in hotels adjacent to international gates, careful to minimize exposure while maintaining contact with intermediaries who relayed instructions, intelligence, and logistical support. Analysts poring over ticketing records and hotel registries noticed that his pattern of travel was neither haphazard nor sporadic. Each segment aligned with precise windows of time, allowing for maximum effect and minimum detection. The agent understood the subtle psychology of anonymity. In a world crowded with travelers, the most dangerous moves often occur in plain sight. The Boeing 707, central to this unfolding narrative, occupied more than a physical space on a flight schedule. It was a symbol, a vessel through which international politics and individual agency intersected. The aircraft's routes connected cities of strategic significance, its flights scheduled with operational regularity that could be anticipated by those who studied its timetables. To the untrained eye, it was merely another plane ferrying passengers from one destination to another. To those reconstructing the operation, it was a locus of potential catastrophe, a controlled system that, if disrupted, could yield consequences both human and geopolitical. Analysts began to scrutinize every facet of the aircraft's environment: maintenance schedules, crew rotations, cargo manifests, even minor operational idiosyncrasies. In these details lay the contours of what could be an unprecedented act of sabotage. The investigative process was painstaking, characterized by an almost forensic attention to detail. Each anomaly, an unusual check-in, a delayed connection, an unregistered accessory in baggage, was cataloged and cross-referenced against intelligence streams from multiple countries. Analysts trained to notice patterns imperceptible to ordinary observers were increasingly convinced that this was not a spontaneous threat, but a carefully designed operation. They considered multiple potential methods of attack: concealment of an explosive device within cargo, tampering with fuel systems, or even interference with navigational equipment. The complexity of possibilities created its own tension, a cognitive pressure that mirrored the urgency of the unfolding threat. Every hour spent analyzing data was simultaneously an hour closer to potential execution, and yet premature intervention risked scattering the pieces before a full understanding could emerge. Across the various agencies involved, there was an acute awareness that timing was everything. Intelligence work of this magnitude requires a balance between caution and decisiveness. Move too early, and the suspect could vanish. Delay too long, and the consequences could be irreversible. Analysts and field operatives coordinated with subtle precision, each action carefully weighed to maintain operational secrecy while steadily constraining the agent's potential to act. Surveillance teams followed him across borders, discreetly documenting interactions and recording patterns, while analysts in dimly lit rooms pored over a growing mountain of digital footprints. The interplay between observation and anticipation became a form of high-stakes strategy. The environment itself, the flow of people, the schedules of aircraft, the rhythm of airports, was both adversary and instrument in the investigation. The agent's travel through multiple countries highlighted not only the physical mobility of the operation, but also the psychological endurance required. Living in transient spaces, navigating foreign cities, and maintaining the composure of an unremarkable traveler demanded a careful negotiation with isolation, stress, and the ever-present awareness of surveillance. Each brief stay in a transit city represented a microcosm of tension: the need to remain inconspicuous, the pressure to communicate with distant handlers, the mental accounting of every potential variable in a complex operational network. Intelligence analysts, observing these movements remotely, gained insight not only into his logistical planning, but also into the mindset of someone operating under constant pressure. There was a sense of disciplined focus, of obsessive attention to detail, that betrayed an individual fully immersed in the stakes of the mission. Simultaneously, the investigators themselves were engaged in a psychological calculus. They moved through layers of uncertainty, reconstructing not only where the agent had been, but why he had chosen specific routes, how he had exploited gaps in security, and what ultimate objective he was pursuing. Every surveillance report, every travel record, every intercepted communication formed a mosaic of intent, gradually revealing the structural logic of the operation. In these moments, the abstract nature of threat became concrete. The vulnerability of a Boeing 707, an aircraft moving through tightly controlled civilian networks, emerged as a tangible challenge to be addressed with both intelligence and ingenuity. The complexity of modern aviation, its reliance on schedules, coordination, and human operators, was simultaneously an asset and a liability in the context of security. As the days unfolded, the operation surrounding the Boeing 707 became a race against time, framed by the intersection of human cognition, logistical planning, and technological oversight. Authorities had to anticipate the agent's next moves while maintaining the delicate balance between secrecy and action. Decisions were informed not by panic or conjecture, but by a methodical aggregation of data, probability, and behavioral analysis. In the background, the ordinary rhythms of air travel continued uninterrupted. Passengers checked in, luggage moved along conveyor belts, and planes taxied across tarmacs with routine precision. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a complex interplay of observation, deduction, and coordination defined the outcome of what could have been a catastrophic event. By the end of this period of surveillance, investigators had achieved a level of understanding sufficient to begin constraining the agent's potential actions. The reconstruction of the possible attack methods, coupled with his documented movements and the timing of the Boeing 707 schedule, provided a framework for intervention. The mission, once opaque and fragmented, had taken on a discernible shape, a deliberate, calculated plan executed by a single operative with access to multiple layers of international infrastructure. The work of analysts, operators, and aviation officials underscored the broader lesson that modern threats often reside in plain sight, hidden within the ordinary patterns of everyday life. Observing and interpreting these patterns required patience, intellect, and a disciplined attention to detail. In reflection, the unfolding operation around the Boeing 707 revealed more than the immediate danger of a potential attack. It illuminated the vulnerabilities inherent in complex systems, the ingenuity of individuals operating under constraints, and the meticulous processes through which intelligence agencies translate observation into action. As the chapter of surveillance drew to a close, the narrative shifted from the abstract threat to the concrete understanding of operational structure, laying the groundwork for the final phase of intervention. The agent remained a figure moving through airports and cities, but the investigative lens had transformed him from an enigmatic presence into a mapped trajectory, a calculated series of choices now under scrutiny. In the stillness that followed the weeks of monitoring, the quiet realization emerged. Vigilance, preparation, and patient observation had illuminated a path toward both comprehension and containment. The story of the Boeing 707's near threat was no longer one of ambiguity. It had become a study in methodical intelligence, human psychology, and the unassuming complexity of global air travel. Airports have a rhythm all their own. The rolling of suitcases across polished floors, the intermittent chimes of boarding calls, the soft hum of fluorescent lighting overhead, they form a cadence that passes unnoticed by most travelers but becomes a canvas for those trained to observe. In this environment, one figure moved with practiced precision, blending seamlessly into the flow of humanity. To the casual observer, he was just another passenger, absorbed in the anonymity that modern travel offers. To intelligence analysts, however, he was a carefully calculated presence every step, every flight, every transient stay hinting at a deliberate design. The pattern was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Short connections in transit cities, flights booked with a meticulous regard for timing, and contacts made with individuals whose identities only partially revealed themselves. What appeared on the surface to be ordinary itineraries began, under the scrutiny of trained eyes, to coalesce into a coherent operational structure. The Boeing 707 at the center of the investigation was more than a machine. It was a node in a complex web of symbolism and vulnerability. Its scheduled routes connected cities that held geopolitical weight, its movements predictable to those who studied the airline's operations with precision. For the agent tasked with targeting it, the aircraft presented both opportunity and risk, a platform through which strategic objectives could be realized. Analysts reconstructed each potential scenario, considering the most plausible methods of attack. Could an explosive device be concealed within cargo or luggage? Could operational systems be tampered with without raising immediate suspicion? Or might the plan involve subtle interference with the aircraft's environment, leveraging mechanical or procedural gaps? The complexity of possibilities underscored the meticulous nature of the agent's mission and the layered vulnerabilities inherent in global aviation. In Europe, the agent's movements were precise and calculated. He passed through sprawling terminals where concourses extended like arteries, where crowds flowed in predictable currents, and security protocols followed rigid schedules. His navigation through these spaces reflected a deep understanding of the environment. He was a figure attuned to timing, aware of the fleeting windows in which observation might lapse. Analysts charted these movements against the backdrop of international flights, noting how each layover seemed timed to exploit the quiet interludes between peak operational periods. There was a method to the transience, a careful balance between presence and invisibility that allowed the operative to remain functionally anonymous while still advancing toward a tangible objective. In Asia, brief stays in hotels adjoining international gates provided both cover and opportunity. Within the quiet confines of a hotel room, the agent coordinated with intermediaries who relayed instructions and intelligence. Each communication was brief, coded, and calculated to minimize detection. The isolation of transient lodging, combined with the anonymity of global travel networks, created a buffer zone, a space where the agent could pause, plan, and adjust without exposing himself to observation. Yet this isolation carried psychological weight. The repetition of airports, the constant flux of strangers, and the ever-present awareness of surveillance imposed a subtle pressure. The agent operated under a persistent cognitive load, balancing the operational requirements of his mission with the personal discipline necessary to maintain an unremarkable appearance. Analysts, observing patterns remotely, began to gain insight not just into logistics, but into the mind of someone functioning under continuous stress, navigating both practical and psychological constraints with careful intent. The investigative process unfolded like a meticulous reconstruction of a complex puzzle. Every anomaly in travelogues, every irregular booking or brief deviation from established patterns was cataloged and cross-referenced with intelligence from multiple sources. Analysts trained to perceive connections invisible to the uninitiated began to see the outlines of a deliberate operation. The agent was not acting in isolation. Each step indicated coordination, suggesting a larger organizational framework supporting the mission. The scale of oversight required to monitor these movements was immense, yet necessary. Each hour spent observing was a measure of both precaution and urgency, a careful negotiation between the risk of premature exposure and the need for complete understanding. The Boeing 707 itself functioned as both target and symbol. Beyond its physical structure and scheduled operations, it represented a convergence of technological, economic, and human systems. Disruption would have implications far beyond a single flight. It could destabilize commercial schedules, generate political fallout, and challenge the perception of safety in international aviation. Analysts reconstructed the aircraft's operational parameters, reviewing maintenance logs, crew rotations, and flight patterns. Every detail provided context for the agent's potential actions, revealing vulnerabilities that might otherwise have remained abstract. The aircraft was both predictable and fragile, a system of interdependent elements where single disruption could cascade into significant consequences. As the operation progressed, the pressure on authorities increased. Timing was critical, and decisions carried weighty consequences. Premature intervention risked alerting the operative and fracturing the intelligence network. Delay risked allowing the plan to reach execution. Maintaining secrecy while constraining opportunity demanded coordination across agencies, countries, and operational domains. Analysts, operators, and aviation officials worked in synchrony, their collective efforts aimed at both comprehension and containment. The ordinary rhythms of air travel, passengers boarding, luggage circulating, planes taxiing, continued obliviously, masking the layers of observation and intervention operating beneath the surface. The challenge lay in orchestrating control without disrupting the delicate equilibrium of everyday operations. By the culmination of this surveillance period, investigators had achieved a refined understanding of the agent's operational structure. Travel patterns, contacts, and timing revealed a coherent strategy, indicating both intent and methodology. The possible methods of attack had been delineated, providing a foundation for intervention and mitigation. What had once been fragmented intelligence, the sum of suspicious flights, brief stops, and coded communications, coalesced into a framework revealing both opportunity and vulnerability. Analysts recognized that modern threats often reside in plain sight, concealed within ordinary systems that are relied upon precisely because they are perceived as routine. The agent's calculated navigation of these systems underscored the subtlety and discipline of his operation, highlighting the stakes inherent in complex, globally connected networks. In reflection, the Boeing 707 operation illuminated broader truths about intelligence, human behavior, and systemic vulnerability. Observing the agent's movements revealed more than the mechanics of a potential attack. It revealed the interplay between preparation, observation, and decision-making in high-stakes environments. The episode underscored how careful planning, meticulous attention to detail, and sustained psychological endurance could intersect with the ordinary to create extraordinary risk. As surveillance concluded, and the operational picture solidified, the narrative shifted from uncertainty to understanding, from hypothetical danger to strategic clarity. The investigation had transformed an abstract threat into a comprehensible structure, one whose management required patience, intellect, and relentless attention to the interplay of human behavior and systemic function. In the quiet aftermath, analysts and operatives alike were left with the sobering recognition that vigilance, methodology, and insight are the most powerful tools in safeguarding against dangers that unfold not with spectacle, but with subtle, deliberate precision. The final phase of the investigation began with a quiet intensity that belied the magnitude of what was at stake. For weeks, intelligence teams had traced the operative's movements, reconstructed his contacts, and mapped the timing of the Boeing 707's scheduled flights. Each day added clarity, each pattern discerned reduced the margin for error. Yet, as authorities shifted from passive observation to active intervention, the psychological weight of the operation became tangible. In the sterile, humming corridors of airports and control centers, operatives moved with deliberate restraint, aware that even the slightest misstep could compromise weeks of painstaking work. The delicate balance between secrecy and action framed every decision, every allocation of personnel, and every calculated glance toward the terminal floors where ordinary passengers moved unaware of the tension beneath their feet. Airport security teams operated with a precision bordering on choreography. Officers positioned themselves in unobtrusive vantage points, blending into the crowds as their eyes traced the calculated movements of the operative. Investigators coordinated with airline staff and aviation officials, each individual performing their task with a quiet rigor. The routines of airport life, luggage scanning, boarding announcements, crew briefings, continued without interruption, creating a duality of experience. For passengers, the day unfolded normally. For those orchestrating the containment, each motion, each interaction, was a component of an intricate system of surveillance and control. Time seemed to stretch and contract, measured not in minutes, but in the alignment of the operative's steps with the predicted timeline of his plan. The operative himself moved through the airport with the same composure and discretion that had characterized his behavior for weeks. Every action was deliberate, each moment spent in a terminal cafe, each step through security lanes, each glance at the surrounding passengers carried meaning in the larger calculus of his operation. Analysts had projected his likely trajectory, estimating the narrow window during which his plan could be executed. The tension among authorities was heightened by the knowledge that the success or failure of their intervention rested on both accuracy and timing. Too early a move could scatter the operation and allow the agent to escape. Too late could permit the execution of a threat whose implications extended far beyond the immediate environment. Behind closed doors, the orchestration of the intervention required coordination across multiple layers of authority. Surveillance teams transmitted live updates, analysts cross-referenced data in real time, and decision-makers weighed options with a measured understanding of risk. The intelligence apparatus functioned as a networked organism. Each node, security personnel, airport staff, aviation regulators, investigators, acted in concert with the others. The challenge lay not only in identifying the operative, but in anticipating every contingency he might exploit, every subtle gap in the system that could turn a contained threat into catastrophe. The meticulous layering of observation, communication, and tactical positioning reflected a deep understanding of both human behavior and systemic vulnerability. As the operative approached the critical juncture in his plan, authorities adjusted their positions, tightening the net while maintaining the appearance of routine activity. There was a deliberate calm to the environment. Nothing overt signaled the heightened vigilance taking place. Passengers continued to board flights, luggage moved along conveyor belts, and the public face of the airport remained serene. Beneath this surface, however, the orchestration was precise and unyielding. Every camera feed, every security checkpoint, every peripheral observation contributed to a dynamic map of the operative's potential actions. The tension was cumulative rather than explosive, a slow-burn intensity that tested the resolve and discipline of those involved. When intervention finally occurred, it was executed with understated decisiveness. Security teams, positioned to respond without causing alarm, moved in synchrony to intercept the operative. Analysts monitored the unfolding actions, confirming that the plan was contained, that each predicted movement aligned with reality. The confrontation was not a spectacle, it was a measured, procedural culmination of weeks of intelligence work. Yet, even in its quiet execution, the event carried profound implications. The operative's mission, meticulously planned and nearly realized, had been thwarted not by dramatic heroics, but by patient observation, calculated anticipation, and disciplined coordination. The moment crystallized the latent tension inherent in complex systems. The proximity of risk existed not in overt chaos, but in the subtle vulnerabilities that emerge when human intent intersects with structure environments. The aftermath of the operation revealed both the thoroughness of the investigative process and the fragility of global aviation systems. Once the operative was contained, analysts conducted comprehensive reviews of the sequence of events, examining both the efficacy of surveillance measures and the mechanisms through which the agent might have succeeded. These reflections underscored the dual nature of modern aviation, is simultaneously robust and delicately balanced, reliant on precise coordination of human, mechanical, and procedural elements. The episode highlighted how a single, determined individual could exploit gaps in these systems, demonstrating the necessity for both vigilance and continuous improvement in security protocols. Governments and airlines responded by reassessing vulnerabilities that had previously been considered minor or theoretical. Maintenance procedures, cargo inspections, passenger screening, and coordination between international aviation authorities were scrutinized, revised, and strengthened. The incident prompted reflection not only on operational procedures, but on the psychological and organizational dynamics of threat perception. Intelligence and security agencies recognize that the absence of immediate disruption does not equate to invulnerability. Threats can evolve within the ordinary, leveraging routine operations to achieve extraordinary consequences. The experience reinforced the principle that risk is embedded in the structures and behaviors that define complex systems, and that mitigation requires both foresight and adaptability. Psychologically, the resolution of the operation offered a layered sense of relief and reflection. Analysts and operatives recognized the close proximity to potential disaster, and the discipline required to maintain composure throughout the weeks of monitoring weighed heavily even after the operative's containment. The calm procedural execution masked the intensity of the cognitive and emotional labor involved. In quiet offices, late into the evening, personnel reviewed sequences of data, reconstructing the operative's logic and evaluating the efficacy of their interventions. The operation became a case study in patient intelligence work, demonstrating how sustained attention, structured anticipation,